This is John Karp from the 48 Laws of Power podcast. My debut album is now available on all major streaming platforms and can be downloaded on iTunes and Amazon.com. Go to johncarp.com for more details. That's JONCARP.com. Thank you.
Don't forget about me.
What's going on, everybody? You're tuned in to the 48 Laws of Power podcast. My name is Rudy Malumba.
And I'm John Karp.
And let's get right into this book. This episode, we're going to do Laws 35 and 36. Law 35 is master the art of timing. The judgment is never seem to be in a hurry. Hurrying betrays a lack of control over yourself and over time. Always seem patient, as if you know that everything will come to you eventually. Become a detective of the right moment. Sniff out the spirit of the times, the trends that will carry you to power. Learn to stand back and when the time is not yet ripe, and to strike fiercely when it has reached fruition.
All right. Well, this is another one of those laws where we're going to forgo the observance and just jump right into the meat of the matter. And the reason being is because the observance it's a pretty long one. It's got a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
And I think by the time I read and go through the entire observance, we may as well just explain the mechanisms of the law itself.
Definitely.
But I would encourage those of you listening, if you haven't read the book, once we go through these different steps in how you can master timing and, little tricks here and there, I definitely encourage you all to read the observance because it's kind of like a perfect case study of it.
Definitely.
But to keep this within a reasonable amount of time, I think we should just jump into it.
And I like these too because we get to go straight to the theory a little bit,
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think it's nice to have the examples,
Yeah.
and as long as they're condensed and kind of we can get to the point of it
Definitely.
rather quickly, I have absolutely no problem going through them and illustrating the point further. But something that's kind of convoluted like this, I think it's best just to, skip it and get into the meat of the matter.
Definitely.
But anyway, so the first thing about, mastering the art of timing is kind of basically learning how to read the change of the times and stuff like that, or the spirit of the times, if you will. And that's the very first part of it is you have to be able to recognize the spirit of the times. Yep. So you have to be able to learn how to anticipate all the twists and turns that might come with the change of times. And one thing that he said in the book that I think is really, really poignant is oftentimes it may not be the things that are the most obvious, right? It could be things that are obscure that you need to pay attention to.
Yep.
So me personally, where I've noticed this has been, I think here in the United States, in the last few years, there's been this big uptake in the interest of implementing socialist policies, right? And that's very obvious, with candidates like Bernie Sanders getting attention and tons of other Democrats actually. And so you would kind of sit there and think, oh, well, probably eventually we might just adopt more socialist policies. But I think that it could actually go the other way, to be perfectly honest with you, because for every obvious, movement, so socialism in the U.S., there's a less obvious reaction to that obvious movement, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it could actually be pushing us in the other way to more of a free market, maybe even more of a free market based nation than what we already are as it is.
Definitely. Yeah, I think one thing that kind of that first part kind of points to is when you look at things in general on a macro scale, with just kind of trends that are going on or just things out in the world, I think in in any I guess in any I guess part of life, you tend to find certain things, certain principles that keep popping up, more or less like natural laws that always just keep popping up, right? So in the short term, we like there's a lot of things that come up that distract us here and there in terms of our emotions, in terms of things we just react to. But overall, on the grand scheme of things, those principles that I was saying before, they keep coming up, right? So you can essentially always bet on those, right?
Right.
So no matter what's going on in life, and no matter what how things seem today or whatever, you can always rest assured that over a long period of time, the same principles that are always kind of self-evident over long periods of time are going to come back, more or less, right?
Yeah, it's the concept that history repeats itself, which it totally does.
Exactly.
And because there's only so many mechanisms at work, and there's only so many ways that you can organize a society, really.
Yeah. Exactly.
And also, too, what you were saying about emotions, we're going to get to that a little bit more, because that's definitely a key component in this. But something else that there's a second thing that one has to be aware of when they're looking to observe the changes of the times, and that's that any potent movement that's going on, it may be the most powerful movement, but it may not necessarily be the movement that you wanted to get associated with if you're trying to gain power, right? So I'll just go back to the example I said before and kind of just ride this through this part of our discussion. Let's say you're wanting to be a politician, right? And you see more and more people digging this whole socialism thing. It might actually behoove you to go on the side that's against that, even if you don't necessarily believe it. You may want to go on the opposite side to kind of gain prestige that way, because if you have a lot of loud voices going socialism, 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 you can get a lot of power by being the opposing force.
Yeah.
Because, there are tons of people in this country who really don't like the idea of socialism at all. And they're probably like, well, where's our spokesman? Yeah. Well, you could be those people's spokesman, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Right. And that gives you a ton of power.
Yeah.
So, that's one way you could apply that.
Yeah. And in a way, it goes against kind of conventional thinking, right? Like, I feel like, especially in today's society, here, especially in the United States and everything, we tend to have a little bit of a kind of short-term kind of mentality with things. So you think someone who's coming into politics, and let's say there's, to kind of use your example, if everyone is kind of communist or not communist, socialist, you would think, oh, just join them because that's the popular thing. You know what I mean? But if you look at things long term, like what you're saying, obviously with every big reaction, there's a reaction to it. It would make more sense to kind of, if you want to gain power, to go the other direction. But most people would probably think, go where everyone else is right now.
Right.
So, so that's, I think the example kind of holds, just in terms of that.
Well, that's the thing. It's like on the surface, it does seem counterintuitive, but when you really stop and think about it, it makes total sense.
100%.
Right? Because you're riding the next wave. Yeah. Like you're seeing this one trend. By the time you see that one trend, it's already peaked. And like the waves on the ocean, once it hits once that wave hits its peak, it's only got one place to go, and that's down.
Yeah.
So you could be on the wave behind it and be on the upward spiral. And if you're really smart, you can get on the wave that's on its way up and then jump off and jump on the other wave behind it.
Absolutely.
So like you could keep changing till you amass power. And that's what a lot of politicians do. That there's tons of politicians that, well, we call them flip-flops here in this country. Yeah. And that's exactly what they're doing, is they're flipping from one position to another because they're anticipating the next change.
And knows the trends.
Yeah. Now the ones who are What's funny too is you can tell the ones that are you can do it very poorly, insofar as you could be writing the next big the wave that's current right now, and that becomes really obvious. Right, you're like, okay, this guy's just doing whatever's popular. But if you're, like I say, if you're going for the if you're anticipating the reaction, then you're kind of seen in the opposite way. You're kind of seen as someone who has some foresight.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I feel like that's the power of timing, right? Just by studying kind of history and historically where trends are going, where trends have been, you kind of get a roadmap of, like by seeing where things have been, you kind of get a roadmap of seeing where things are going, and it gives you enough kind of clarity to foresee different things, no matter what, where you are in life and what, I guess, whether it be a career field or whatever else, you can kind of foresee that based on the history. And so time it's essentially a roadmap, I've seen that in music too, just in terms of, artists that are pretty consistent over time, especially in the pop realm, whether they stay pretty consistent despite changes in how music is made and how music sounds and stuff. And a lot of them do that too, and there's some of the obvious ones who you can clearly see, oh, they're riding a wave clearly. Yeah. And there's some other ones too who you could tell have kind of thought it out and just continue to remain successful. Yeah. By kind of foreseeing what trends are coming up and then sticking to that and then keeping going like that.
Definitely. And then the final thing to kind of be aware of when learning to basically learn how to master your timing, so to speak. And it's this: it's without patience, you will fail inevitably. So you have to be patient for the changing of the season, so to speak. Absolutely. Right? So kind of like, okay, so when you're investing, a big mistake that a lot of people make is when they invest in the stock market is when the stock market starts to crash, they'll pull all their money out. Everything out, yeah. Which is a terrible mistake, because you've taken out whatever money you put in when the stock market was doing well, and that you've just taken out now is not doing so well. Well, you just lost all that money. Lost that money, yeah. Right? What you really ought to do, and the thing with markets is there's always a cycle of bear and bull markets. Bull markets being where everything's doing great. Bear markets is when everything starts going down. And that's a continual cycle. You're never going to stop that, because that's how markets work. There's periods when everything's great, periods when everything's not so great. So the wise thing to do was, if you find that we're in a bear market, everything's going down, keep what stocks you have and buy some more stocks, because everything's at a cheaper price.
That's true.
Right? Yeah. And then just sit on those, and when the next bull market comes along, then you can sell some stocks. Yeah. Right? And take that money and do whatever it is you need to do with it. Yeah. So that's kind of one of those things where, you have to be patient enough to sit through that particular tide. Yeah. Right? And just understand that, at a certain point, this tide's going to rise again, and I'll be back to where I was before. And in fact, if I've bought some more stocks at this point in time, I will probably be doing even better in the future. So it's kind of always playing for the long run. Yeah. Right.
And financial experts tell you that too. I mean, if you're trying to invest, you have to be prepared for the long haul. Like, it's something that you put money in and you don't take it out, until you're like retired almost, right? Like that's kind of the way to think about it. And again, something I was thinking about while going through this chapter was about how some of the principles in this law kind of go against, I want to say, kind of popular thinking, or kind of conventional to today's conventional wisdom, which is really mostly about kind of the short term, kind of the satisfaction and the what's it called when you want things quickly, you know what I mean? Like that kind of mindset.
Oh yeah,
is very pervasive nowadays.
Yes. So instant gratification.
Instant gratification kind of thinking. So like and with that kind of thinking, you're never able to build any true kind of patience,
Mm-hmm.
by going the other way with it and trying and thinking more long term. That's how you kind of get patience. So I feel like there's kind of a contrast with everything that he was talking about in this chapter, specifically about delaying things, delaying the gratification you want now for later, and planning for the future, with kind of just the mindset that I find is very pervasive nowadays in pop culture, I think.
Yeah, I'm kind of actually that kind of gets us to the next point, and that is when you're dealing with timing, you have to keep your emotions under control as well.
Yeah.
Right? That's a key component of this, because if you don't, you're likely to kind of chase the next fever, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So, like, again, back to the stock market example, if you see the stocks dropping, you don't keep your emotions under control, you're freaking out. You're like, oh my God, I gotta get my money out of here now.
Mm-hmm.
No, you have to learn to keep that under control, right?
Yeah.
Because it is terrifying to see the stock market crash. It's horrifying.
Yeah.
But keep your cool and look towards the future, and you'll be fine, basically. Yeah. And also, too, this kind of, we've talked about this before, those scams where they're like, limited time offer, blah, blah, blah. It's, if, those things are designed to basically get you to react immediately to something. Yep. And, not really think it through. You're just acting on your emotions. Whereas if you can control your emotions and you go, okay, hold on, do I really need this right now? Could there be a possibility I could get a better deal if I just wait?
Yep.
It's one of those things. Granted, you don't want to wait too long for anything, but the idea is that you don't want your emotions to control your your decisions, especially if you're trying to master the art of timing.
Absolutely.
Right. We're about to get into this too. This goes both ways. If you're too trepidatious to do anything, you're like, well, I'll just wait and wait, then you're never going to seize anything, right? At the same time, if you just react to the to whatever's going on in the news that's causing the market to drop or whatever, then and you react to it, you're going to end up on the losing side as well all the time. It's always got to keep your emotions in balance so that you can see clearly to what's going to be happening next, and how you can either ride the beginnings of a new trend or take advantage of a falling trend.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. And just kind of going back to what in the beginning, the main thing you can kind of rest your laurels on is that kind of there's with time, when you look at things from a macro scale, there's ups and downs, and there's all the things, there's the cycles, all that, but ultimately there are there's principles that are self-evident when you look at things long term. So it's like whenever you're dealing with anything, it's good to look at what those principles are and to just know that, hey, they're always going to pop up again. So in terms of your dealing with your emotions, I feel like that's the primary way to look at it. Just look at things like the world is the way it is, and these are the principles that keep popping up over time. So even though I might want this thing or that thing, or I might want things to be a certain way, I have to accept the way the world is, and boom, that's it. You're given a roadmap, more or less, if you know kind of historically how things are, et cetera, et cetera. So I think too here, something that Green kind of touches on is about how essentially the things that you get easy aren't really worth it. It's things that you work hard at, and it's things that take a lot of time that are worth it. And so I thought that was an interesting kind of point they touched on here, which he also kind of echoed on in another one of his books, Mastery, where he talks about kind of the process to become a master, which really, it was essentially this law that he expounded in that book.
Right. I almost cut you off because I didn't want you to go too far on this, because this kind of gets into 3 different types of time that he talks about in
Okay.
the book.
Yeah.
And you kind of started taking us down this one road,
yeah,
but I want to establish these different types of time before we keep going down the road
Okay.
here.
Yeah, definitely.
So the first one is long time, and then there's force time, and then there's end time. So we'll talk about long time first because we've already kind of started on that path.
Okay. Yeah, definitely.
Basically, yeah, what you're saying is you have to have patience and see through things
Absolutely.
all the way through in order
Absolutely.
to reap the rewards from that, right?
Definitely.
So I think this is particularly applicable in like a career setting, right? If you're just jumping from career to career, you're not going to have enough time to master a career. So you're always going to be behind.
And what do
right?
you really build by that? What
You
do
don't build
you?
anything.
You're not doing anything. Yeah.
You know, the fact of the matter is, okay, I always have to explain this to people in their early 20s all the time. The fact of the matter is that, look, you're probably not going to make a living at whatever it is your ambition is right at the get-go. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You have to prove your worth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to have to struggle for quite some time
Yeah.
until you do. But if you stick to it and you prove that you're worthy of this kind of work, whatever it might be, then more and more people will see that your reputation will grow and you will eventually make a living at what it is that you're doing,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
But you have to stick to it through thick or thin
Mhm.
in order to reap the rewards,
Absolutely.
right? And I think in regards to work too, in this country in particular, I don't know about you, but I see a lot of this idea of quantity over quality.
Mhm.
And I think that's really bad. And I think it shows in a lot of aspects in our society, but particularly in our ability to manufacture things. It used to be like in the 1950s, buying American made, you couldn't get anything better than American made,
Oh, okay.
right? Maybe you're not aware of that because you're originally from another country.
Yeah. I was like, oh, this is news to me.
Oh, well,
American made, really.
oh yeah, dude. Yeah, I mean, it used to be the United States was the place to get
Yeah.
your stuff made.
I know
right?
the car industry was booming. And
Well,
everything like that.
Particularly the car industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, that absolutely. You're absolutely right about that. As a matter of fact, even in the 1990s, I mean, it was starting to go away, but even the car industry, like American cars, that's where it was at.
Mhm.
But what's happened since is, it's like we've stopped mastering the craftsmanship of building a car or whatever else,
Yeah.
and just going like, well, we need to produce this amount of units and we need to do it at this time. And, so it's kind of like, let's just make as many things as we can. And the thing is, if you speed up production like that all the time for everything,
Yeah.
you're going to sacrifice quality.
100%.
And then what's going to end up happening is, well, speaking of cars, all of a sudden no one's going to want to buy Chrysler. They're going to want to buy Nissan.
Yep.
Why?
Because the Chrysler's keep breaking down.
Exactly. But Nissan, on the other hand, lasts a lot longer.
100%.
And that's the thing is, and I bring all that up to say that if you're constantly rushing all the time, you're not taking time to do your work properly.
Yep.
Okay, fine. You might get ahead for a little bit by rushing, but in the long run, it's going to catch up to you,
Absolutely.
right? So you don't really want to be in a place where you're having to rush your work all the time.
100%.
You want to try to take your time, get it right, and then put it out, right?
100%. Yeah. And I feel like the reason why we might be rushing in general is because of the pressures of the day and things like that. Especially if we're talking kind of in a career setting, because ultimately you do need to pay your bills. You do need to do all these things. So there's certain things that have to be on your mind, especially if you're thinking long term, career wise and everything. But it's always so I kind of feel like it's good to have a short term solutions to kind of like the pressures of the day, but to always have your mind thinking 10, 20 years ahead, things like that. And also, I mean, in terms of becoming really great at something, I mean, it's something that's very important. It's and I think people need to remind themselves of that. It could be really easy to get bogged down and go, okay, I have to pay these bills. I have to figure out a way to do that. I have to do this. So I have to get this job here, that job here, all that stuff. But ultimately, when you look at the thing that you do for the rest of your life, it has to be something that brings you value and something that's very important to you. So it is of ultimate importance. And it's something that I think the process of getting really good at something, giving yourself that time and that kind of discipline and patience to do that is a bit of a rite of passage that I think everyone needs to do, because ultimately when you get to the end of that, I mean, it's the most rewarding work ever, because one, it's effortless. It's something that you've done so much, and it's effortless. It's easy to do. I mean, it's demanding, but you've done it so much that it's like second nature to you. And also it's something that you keep. It's like you reach the returns. What is it? It's like it's almost like you can do it in your sleep, and it's satisfying to you, and then you keep doing more, and then it keeps accelerating that way.
Sure. Yeah.
So I feel like that's kind of what the investment in this long time period that he's talking about here is, where it's like it's something that that takes a lot of work, takes a lot of discipline, but ultimately it breeds in you the kind of person that can handle like the success that comes from that, the success that comes from you diligently working for a long time. Something that if you got in a short period of time, you wouldn't appreciate.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if he said it in the book, but he was essentially saying things that you get easy aren't worth it. The things that are worth it just take a long time. So I think that's what he was kind of getting at there.
Yeah. Along with that, there's a lot of advantages to looking at things in the long term. And first is like your mind isn't cluttered, right? You're not having to put out one fire and then another fire. 100%. You're not in an emergency state all the time.
Absolutely.
Right. Another thing too is you're a lot less likely to resist the scams of others, right? So like people who, let's say they want to be a superstar, right? They might be, or like rock star or whatever, right? They might be tempted to sign this like 360 record deal that basically takes all the royalties and all the, basically owns everything that they ever make.
Yeah.
But, they get $1 million check the first day. It's very tempting for someone to just grab that and go. But in the long run, that record company is making way more money
100%
than you will. And you eventually kind of get screwed over.
You're pretty much signing your life away.
Yeah, it's essentially what you're doing. Yeah. But it's very tempting to someone who is, wants that success now, right? And here's the third thing is kind of biding your time. It leaves you to be more flexible. So as opposed to an artist who signs that 360 deal, that person has no flexibility. Someone who waits for a better offer, they have way more flexibility.
100%.
And that's not just true for musicians. That's true for people in general, right? You want that ability to be flexible. That gives you a tremendous amount of power.
Absolutely.
Right.
Definitely.
If you have to be stuck in one thing, and you're forced into that rigidity, that cuts down a lot of things. Cuts down on creativity and productivity and innovation, and you don't want that. Not if you want to be successful, and not if you want to amass power, right? And of course, like what I was saying earlier, if you stick to one trajectory and you don't bounce around, you're going to, like what we were both saying, you're going to build up reputation,
absolutely,
and notoriety,
definitely,
and that will serve you in the long run.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of going back to what you're saying, the example of the 360 deal, I think that's a great example for a couple reasons. One, by someone kind of offering you that quick money up front, where your eyes are so focused on the money, it's not necessarily focused on the craft or anything else. One, you're taking a shortcut, and two, you essentially have a thumb screw. The same thing we're talking about in the past law, where you have some sort of weakness that someone could take advantage of. Your weakness is, I want the money, and I'll do anything for the money. So people will take that and try to spin it in the way that they do. So I feel like when you have kind of a more longer term vision, you don't necessarily have that thumbscrew or that weakness. You kind of go like, oh, I could do without the money. That's not what's the most important to me. At this point, it's about developing myself or my craft or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I feel like that puts you in a better position. Two, I kind of feel like I feel like this is a very human problem also, that the being distracted thing. You know, it's something that everyone deals with, because I feel like naturally our minds are very scattered and we're focused on the here and now, as opposed to kind of, you know, the long term. So it's something that I think it just takes work all across the board, whether it be your career, or just your well-being. You know, by focusing on the distractions too much, it's hard to get the bigger picture in life, and I feel like that's very important in your day-to-day as well.
Yeah, well, you know, to add to that, it also cuts down your ability to recognize, you know, the changing of the times.
Exactly.
If you get stuck in your the demands of your immediate work and your immediate job or whatever, you know, a lot of times it ends up becoming your life, and you're missing out on, or you kind of exchange your focus on that task to observing what's changing around you.
Yeah.
Things that you could be taking advantage of, right?
Absolutely.
So, you know, that's why if you can think long term, you know, of course you're still going to have to focus on the task at hand. That's never going to stop, you know, and you do have to meet deadlines and all that.
Yeah.
This isn't like a you know, a free pass for procrastination. That's not the point. It's just understanding that, you know, yes, serve the tasks that are at hand, but also look towards the future and plan accordingly.
100%. Another quick thing. So Robert Greene's other book, Mastery, talks about this a lot, but he talked a lot about how in your 20s, the best thing to do is not to get like, if you're in a position where, let's say you have a degree, or you're in a position to get like a high paying job right out of college or something, not to take it. Instead, to take a job that will get you enough money that you need, but will kind of put you on the ground floor. Because when you get a high paying job or something, there's a lot more pressure on you. So now you go into like kind of a new space, and you're focused on trying to impress the people around you, because if you don't impress them, then they might let you go, whatever. So now all your focus is on that and not on learning. So you're just trying to prove to people something. And so that kind of takes you out of a lot of stuff. And so really what ends up happening is, instead of putting all your attention on the task at hand, you're putting your attention on, oh, how do I look if I do this? How do I look if I do that?
Yeah.
I think that was a pretty good example, a good example of kind of the regular day-to-day stuff that people kind of deal with on the road to, you know, kind of being disciplined in terms of time and stuff like that.
Definitely. Well, that brings us to the next thing, which is what he called force time. And force time is basically it's basically using timing against other people. Yeah. So it's either getting people to hurry up or to slow down.
Absolutely.
And you can kind of take advantage of that. Mm-hmm. I guess in a context you could use this in. Well, scammers use it all the time.
All the time.
You know, special offer, like I was saying earlier, special offer, buy now, right? And you get people emotionally charged to buy now. I think in a, you know, in a business sense, let's say you're applying for some work and you're pretty confident in your abilities, like what we were talking about with Christopher Columbus. Mm-hmm. You could, you know, go into a place of employment and go, you know, listen, I've got all these other offers. I'm only here for a short time, so you know, you can play that card and
absolutely
get that employer to go, you know, he's actually really good. We should jump on him before someone else gets him. Yeah. You know? Yeah. And then in terms of like slowing down time, if you can get people to slow down, that gives you a lot of power, because especially in this culture, people are running around, sometimes it seems like, without any rhyme or reason. So if you're able to kind of get people to stop and appreciate what's around them, you're like a guru of some kind.
It takes a lot of, You get a lot of power out of that.
Yeah, you do. Yeah,
definitely. I think this forced time kind of topic is something I've seen a lot. I've actually heard, scammers is something that they do a lot. Obviously, when I actually heard a story of a friend I knew who was in a situation where he caught up with a couple of guys and they were saying they were trying to sell some sort of equipment. I think it was musical or whatever it was. And they told him, hey, listen, we bought this equipment from the store, but they messed up and they gave us one extra one. So, we can sell this to you right now. And they had all these flyers are like, yeah, this is actually valued at this amount, but we'll give it to you for half of it. You know what I mean? But you got to buy it now because we're about to go to work. You know what I mean? And you're in a situation like that, you're like, oh, what, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of a steal and blah, blah, whatever. But it's all a ruse. They have nowhere to go. They're just trying to scam you out of some stuff,
Mm-hmm.
or even, like you're saying in commercials, the little infomercials where they go, oh, if you buy now, we'll include this, we'll include that, we'll include this, we'll include that. So then you think I have to act right now, or else. And I think this is something you see everywhere, honestly. The people always use kind of, with sales, today only, come here, do this at like car dealerships, Memorial Day, come in here, buy, all these things. Like
we just had Black Friday.
Exactly, yeah. On Black Friday, the prices are this, but if you come the next day, it's going to be different.
Yeah.
Like it's something that's actually very powerful to use. Matter of fact, we talked about in a previous law, Joseph Devine doing something kind of like this, where he would show the first day you'd come, he'd show a bunch of his art and stuff, and then the next day you'd come, he'd show his art, but it was lesser quality.
Yeah, he'd show art of a lesser quality. Yeah.
So then you would think, I have to buy something now, or else it's going to keep getting worse. I feel like it's a very powerful tool to use because people are very people respond to kind of being put in a crunch in terms of time.
Yeah,
and it also kind of, like you're saying, it gets them not to think as much. So it's easy to manipulate someone who's not able to think.
Right. Whereas it's a lot harder to manipulate someone who has a much more long-term perspective and isn't caught in that crunch time mindset. And
this is also something that's it's useful to use defensively. So when you're in a position where you're like, oh, this person here is putting a lot of pressure on me in terms of time, I wonder why. You know what I mean? Then you could be like, oh, maybe I'm going to reconsider, and maybe someone's trying to pull the wool over my eyes or something like that. But it's just looking at how useful a tool it is to use on people means that people are probably trying to use it on you. So it's good to be aware of that. Yeah, well, yeah, it's definitely a good self-defense mechanism. And but you can also, obviously, we talk about this all the time, you can use these things to a positive end as well, and that includes this concept of forced time. Yeah. I think another example, too, is at work. Not at work, but like at a job interview or something like that. A lot of times, when you're done or when you're finishing an interview, if you mention something like, oh, just so you guys know, I'm currently interviewing with like 3 other companies. They're going to give me a response by this date. So you guys have to make up your mind. You know what I mean? Yeah. I think I brought that up earlier. Oh, you did? I'm sorry, John. Just in case you thought it was the original idea of yours, it wasn't. I'm sorry, buddy. That's kind of like that thing where you tell your friend a story, and then they literally tell you the same story, but then they pretend it happened to them. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry about that. Buddy. It's all right. Whatever. It's fine. It's funny. I thought it was funny. I'm sure someone who's listening to this right now is like, he literally just said that, Rudy. Wow. Oh, man. Anyway, so then the third type of time is called end time. And remember what I was saying earlier, that patience is the key to this? Yeah. Well, patience is useless unless you act on when the time is right. 100%. Right? So if you are waiting for the right opportunity and then the opportunity comes, you don't take it, well, you just wasted your time. Yep. 100%. So patience is useless unless you have the intention to act when the time is right. Definitely. And this is something Robert Greene talks about a lot. He talks about doing things with boldness, right? So I think this end time type of time is really the end of the planning all the way to the end kind of thing. So when you have some goal in mind, and you spend all this time and all this discipline and all this patience working up the thing, or orchestrating a bunch of things against each other, or however you do it, at the end you have to act boldly in order to get it done. And so this is another part of just mastering time, is knowing when to strike. You know what I mean? You don't always have to be the super passive person. It's like you can be the passive person, but when the opportunity comes to do whatever you had planned, it's time to go do it with ferocity and boldness and everything like that.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of, I think we talked about this, of Muhammad Ali and George Foreman, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, boxers in general, I guess, use this tactic where they'll let the other guy wear themselves out, and then they'll come in and knock him out, basically.
Exactly.
And I think it, kind of works the same way, like for anything, whether it's a job or if it's some kind of ambition, or if you're leading troops in the battle or whatever.
Yeah.
Patience is good, but if you don't bookend it with action, then
what was it? What are you waiting for?
Yeah, basically.
There's always that for that you're waiting to do. You know what I mean? There's something.
Yeah.
So, it's about being as effective as possible when that time comes.
Yeah.
Which is, again, another dimension of the mastering time. It's not all about just sitting there and waiting. It's also about acting at the appropriate times in order to get the thing done.
Definitely. Reversal
time. So Robert Greene essentially says, for this law, there is no reversal. There's really no power that can be gained by letting go of the reins and adapting to whatever time brings. So that just kind of points to how important it is to master the art of timing and not just act on a whim and be swayed by your emotions, etc.
Right. Okay. Well then, law 36.
Let's do this thing. Law number 36. Disdain things you cannot have. Ignoring them is the best revenge. The judgment is, by acknowledging a petty problem, you give it existence and credibility. The more attention you pay an enemy, the stronger you make him. And a small mistake is often made worse and more visible when you try to fix it. It is sometimes best to leave things alone. If there is something you want but cannot have, show contempt for it. The less interest you reveal, the more superior you seem.
All right. Well, this one I will tell. Robert Greene gave both a transgression and an observance. I think the transgression was by far the best example for this. So the transgression is really against the American government, right?
Mm-hmm.
So basically what had happened was there was this Mexican, he was really a bandit at one time. His name was Pancho Villa, or Villa, as they would say, because it's Spanish and two L's make a Y sound.
There you go.
Anyway, so Pancho here, he, like I said, he was a bandit, but when this revolution broke out in Mexico, this would have been like 1910, he joined the side of the rebels and became kind of a folk hero in a way, because he'd rob trains, give them to the poor, and do all these daring raids and all that stuff.
Like Robin Hood.
Do what now?
Kind of like Robin Hood.
Yeah, kind of like a Robin Hood figure. Anyway, but after the revolution, he went back to his robbing trains bit, or just being a bandit, and people in Mexico were like, yeah, I really don't like this guy now.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was kind of, on the run, and ended up in the northern part of Mexico, and then crossed over into America and started doing bandit stuff there. And on one occasion, he actually killed several Americans, and some of whom were American soldiers, and this essentially acted as a kind of a war act in a way.
Yeah.
An act of war rather. So the American government decided that it was time to take action, particularly President Woodrow Wilson at the time, who was seen as a pacifist. He really wanted to convince the people of the U.S. that he wasn't just some guy who's going to stand by and let this happen.
Yeah.
That if need be, he would enforce his will. right? Through action. So, so you would think, okay, well, they'll probably send like, a couple guys along the border, wait for this Pancho fellow to show up, and then they'll snag him then, right?
Yeah.
Or at the very least, or maybe they might send some guys to go into, a couple guys that kind of like Navy SEALs in a way, to go into Mexico and hunt this guy down.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no. They send in like a full battalion, and airplanes are flying over to do reconnaissance to find this guy. And the Mexican government approved this. Like, they were like, yeah, let's do it. And the Americans are coming to Mexico. They're offering $50,000 to anyone who can give any information as to the whereabouts of this Pancho guy. And after a little while, the Mexican people were like, we really don't like these Americans coming into our homeland. They're basically invading our space. And this Pancho guy kept always seemed to be one step ahead of the Americans, and like kind of would like do these little guerrilla tactics against them, and just kind of harass them, really. And so the Mexican people kind of once again started to see him as a folk hero a little bit, and they would give the Americans false information as to the whereabouts of Pancho, giving like false leads and whatnot, and Pancho was able to escape. And after a while, the basically the Americans just kind of wore themselves thin trying to find this one guy. Yeah. And they decided, you know what, forget it. We're wasting a lot of money and time. And back home in the U.S., Pancho kind of endeared himself to the American people at home, because they're like, this is ridiculous that our army can't find this one guy, and it kind of became a joke. So Woodrow Wilson, ordered the army to return, and Pancho was never caught. Yeah. So
Woodrow Wilson gets that big transgression right there, all in his face.
Yeah.
I think that just kind of first of all, Pancho Villa became kind of mythologized, I guess, in a way, or mythified. I don't know what word is, but became a mythic figure, right? Because one, the optics, if you see like all these, the entire battalion coming in, trying to, like a massive force like the United States government trying to find this one guy, it's kind of a David and Goliath thing, where you go, well, I'm on the side of David then, because he's just, the one person, and he's eluding all of them. So, he kind of gained some credibility and some favor, because he looks like he's the victim. So, so that was kind of the fruit that was born out of the Americans just being so, I guess, like approaching this issue with so much power, instead of disdain. In the same manner, like Green talks about there, as someone kind of trying to, pursue a woman. If you pursued a woman, or if a man whoever you're interested in, with a lot of zeal, sometimes that turns the person off. So in the same way that example works, the United States government essentially did that to Pancho Villa, and everyone reacted to it in a way where it was like, no, that's too much. We're for that guy now. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think kind of what you're alluding to is the idea that if you're going after what is really just an irritant, which is what Pancho was compared to the U.S. government. I mean, yeah, some American soldiers died, but it's like, I think it was only like 6 of them. It's not the same thing as like a full frontal invasion. It's a different story if like Mexico's taking their entire army and coming up the southern border. It's a completely different story if it's just like one rogue guy. Like I said, the rational thing to have done would have been to get some guys at the border, and when he comes across, snag him then, instead of involving or expending all this money by basically doing a small scale invasion just to find one guy. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It's nuts.
Right? Yeah, it's insane. But and the worst thing about it is, I mean, it doesn't work on both ways, because obviously if you fail, you look like a complete idiot, which is what the Americans looked like.
Yeah.
You know. But at the same time, if you're successful and you capture this poncho guy or whatever, now everyone thinks that you're the bad guy, because you know they go ahead and romanticize this poncho guy. Cause, oh, look, he eluded these Americans for this long, you know, and all of a sudden you look like this kind of irrational, petty party, right?
Absolutely.
And in terms of like what you're talking about, seduction, it works the same way. If you're too keen on someone and you make it way too obvious, and we've talked about this particular story all the time, but
comes up a lot.
Yeah, was it the guy
Ninon de L'Enclos?
Her advice to the Marquis de Sévigné. Yeah, you know, he was, you know, like that particular individual. You know, if you're way too aggressive in pursuing someone that interests you romantically, it's going to turn them off. It's going to make you look desperate and pathetic, right? Whereas if you kind of, you know, drop a little interest but then go off and do your thing, come back, then they're going to want to chase after you, right? So it's kind of the idea of let them come to you, don't go after them necessarily.
Exactly. And another example actually pops in to when we're talking about the law about absence and presence. The long drawn out example about the man that wanted the woman he was with to miss her, so he would leave for long periods of time, et cetera, et cetera. So to her it seemed like, oh, he's not interested in me anymore, and that made her want him even more. So it's essentially kind of works in the same way, where if it's very so that example was kind of, you know, I guess the opposite of, you know, the Ninon de L'Enclos one, but the same kind of rule applies. Like if you're in terms of seduction, if you're I guess pursuing the person too fervently and it's too obvious, then that kind of draws them away, etc. Yeah,
definitely. And the funny thing about this is that you can kind of use if you're not achieving what it is that you want, you can kind of show contempt for it, and that's pretty clear in even the title of this law: disdain things you can't have.
Things.
Things. Right.
That,
yeah, exactly. Which is it's one of those things to me that it really just depends. Like, it's one thing, I think, to go. Let's say you're nominated for a Grammy, right? It's one thing to go like, well, I'm just here for the party, and if I win, great, and if I don't, whatever.
Yeah.
You know? To me, it's quite another to go to be like, oh, I'm the best musician, then you don't win, you're like, oh, I didn't want it anyway.
Yeah, I hate the Grammys. That's why I went in my new tux and everything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, if you're the latter, right? You just look like an idiot.
Exactly.
Like that makes you look petty.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of like the idea is to be nonchalant, kind of again when it comes to pursuing a individual that you fancy, right? Nonchalance wins you more in the long run. I think there was a law we talked about that.
Yeah.
I can't remember which one.
I don't remember off the top of my head. Yeah.
But it was kind of like it. I think that's how kind of like having an air of disdain for things that you can't have works best, right?
Yeah.
Is if you're just kind of nonchalant about it, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I believe it would tend to work if you're, if it's not obvious that because you didn't get the thing, that's why you're showing disdain. I kind of feel like if you can kind of mask that in any way, then people will tend to kind of believe you. I think.
Yes.
And I actually think, I mean, I can't think of an example of this, but I'm actually pretty sure. I know we don't like to bring him up, but you know, President Trump, of course,
our president, yes.
For some reason, he was the first person that popped in my head when I thought of this, about people who maybe wanted something, they didn't get it, and then they pretended like they didn't want it anyways. I know that that's kind of how he tends to react whenever, some, NFL or NBA team doesn't want to go to the White House or something.
Right.
He'll be like, "Oh, we didn't want you here anyways."
Right.
And things like that.
Sure.
And I feel like, in those situations, even though it is obvious that he's clearly saying that because they refuse to come there,
Mm-hmm.
I think it works for some people. They'll be like, "Oh, look at him. He's, kind of saying like what he wants and what he doesn't want." And sometimes, in some cases, he actually gains the respect. I feel like there's a way to do it where you just come out and say it, even though it is, in some cases, might be obvious that you're saying that because you didn't get the thing, and it still might work. Because I don't know why, because I think it worked when Trump did it for a lot of people.
Well,
maybe it's because he had the support or whatever.
I think that's really what it is.
But even then, if he had the, I don't know, man. Like what Green says a lot in this book is that power, the antithesis of power is when you want something too bad or something like that, right? And for people who act that way, even if you had the power, you're gonna lose it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for you to maintain that power by doing something that would lose you power, I don't know. I in my eyes, what you're doing works,
right?
I would imagine. You know what I mean? So even though he had the support initially, and he acted in a way that seemed obvious that he was doing it just because of how the other people reacted, I don't know. I don't know.
Maybe I don't know. It might, obviously it must work on some people.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's really something that works across the board.
Yeah.
I think it works on a lot less people than you might suspect.
It's the exception, not the rule.
Yeah, and also too, I don't think. Here's the thing: people who are, and since we're talking about Trump, I think people who are like truly Trump fans, right? They're like his loyal fan base.
Yeah.
I think honestly, they make up a minority rather than a majority. I think most of the people who voted for the guy did so because they thought he was a better option versus Hillary Clinton or the other third parties or whatever the case may be. I think there's a big difference between someone who voted for Trump and a Trump supporter, right? And I think to like his supporters, a move like that probably works because I think honestly they kind of just see him as a demagogue in a way, and they're like, oh, he can do no wrong.
Yeah.
I think it's really just more like a cult mentality, to be perfectly honest with you.
Okay.
Whereas everybody else just kind of sees it for what it is, which is just a petty move.
It's him being petty.
Yeah. So,
definitely.
I think we run into a danger in thinking that just because he's our president that he represents all of us, because he doesn't. I think it's just the fact that the circumstances allowed him to be president, because let's be honest, his other opponent wasn't that well liked, and if you ask me, for good reason. So anyway, I'm getting off my soapbox now.
So ultimately then, okay, essentially it's about being measured then, about how you apply this law. It's you don't want to be too obvious about, so I didn't get this thing, so now I'm obviously anti that thing. It's about being more subtle with it. And not making it that obvious, and not making it appear that obvious.
I think that's generally the rule. Yeah. Unless, again, you have like a devout group of followers, which, let's be honest, that's not a majority of people.
Yeah. Definitely.
I certainly don't have a devout group of followers.
Yeah, I don't think I do either. I don't think.
Anyway, but one thing I did want to add was this thing that he wrote, which I think is brilliant. It is tempting to want to fix our mistakes, but the harder we try, the worse we often make them. So I think this could be a good thing to bear in mind in regards to rebuilding Afghanistan after the invasion. We've been there for over 15 years now, right?
Yeah, since 2003.
Yeah. And I get, and I agree with this, like we did this World War II and South Korea to an extent. or in South Korea, I should say.
Did you say World War also or World War II?
I said World War II.
Oh, okay. But did you mean like World War TOO? Or world, because you
what are
you
you
were
talking
listening
about?
Because you said World War II. We did this for World War II, and we did this for Vietnam. I think
Korea.
For Korea.
Yeah,
So
South Korea.
I just wanted. I didn't know if you were talking
an
about the
extent.
First World War. So you were saying
No,
we did
no.
this for World War
World War II.
II. Okay.
The second one. Part 2. The sequel.
Part 2, the sequel. There you go.
Yeah. So we did this in Japan and Germany,
Okay.
or in Europe actually as a whole after World War II, and then also in South Korea after the Korean War, which
Okay.
technically is still going on, but that's neither here or there.
Yeah.
Point is that we stayed behind and we helped rebuild the country, which good on us. And the thing was, Afghanistan and Iraq is kind of a different story. Like Iraq, we kind of just said, all right, enough is enough. We did the best we could. We're out of here.
Yeah.
We're still sticking around in Afghanistan because the Taliban has a tremendous amount of power. And, good on us for sticking around and fixing what we destroyed, because we did a lot of airstrikes, destroyed the infrastructure of Afghanistan, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, after a while, does our presence there and trying to fix the mess that we made, that after a while, don't you think that kind of starts to work against us?
Yeah.
Because
100%.
you start harboring, again, like the poncho guy, start harboring resentment from the local population, because after a while, they might not see you as being a beneficial force, but rather, what we essentially were, which was an invading force. Granted, the reason we went there might have been noble, but that kind of gets lost if you stay there for too long. After a while, people go, okay, you know what, we've had enough of you, get out of here. And then they might end up siding with the Taliban, which would make the whole point of going to Afghanistan completely pointless.
Yeah, definitely. Whenever it starts looking like a more or less a David and Goliath thing, where there's kind of bigger power on one side than on the other, then you tend to kind of lose favor more. Right? So in that case, it's definitely the same thing there. I think the principle of you by trying to fix the mistakes you made, and instead of just kind of conceding to it, you tend to do more harm. I think that's very accurate. I'm not sure if he touched on it this chapter, but I know that he talks a lot about how sometimes you should accept your mistakes, but also downplay them. That way, again, if we're looking at appearances, by you downplaying your own mistakes, people tend to kind of run with that and go, okay, I guess the mistake wasn't that big of a deal if he's not putting that much of an importance on it.
Yeah.
And he's kind of just, downplaying it, but still the overall principle still works. I mean, you tend to do more harm to a mistake you made if you try to cover it up versus you just addressing it and saying, yeah, I made this mistake.
Yeah, I mean, I should probably clarify that at this point, it's really more of a NATO coalition that's in Afghanistan. It's not really a combatant role. It is still very much it is at this point now more of a humanitarian kind of a thing. So probably what I just said is null and void. But I think it kind of remains. Let's say that we were. Well, it may even still remain true, even if it is a NATO coalition. Because again, it might be perceived as this foreign body. I don't care where they're from. Yeah. It could foster some resentment even still.
Yeah, definitely.
So I don't know, it's something to bear in mind.
Absolutely.
But I think we're on to the reversal, my friend.
All right. For the reversal to law 36, essentially all he's saying is for this law, it's good to play, if you are going to use contempt, to also handle it with care and delicacy. There's sometimes situations you could get into where maybe you're treating somebody with contempt, or maybe you're ignoring a certain person, or you're treating them negatively. You don't know if that person at some point is going to gain power. It's going to use that against you. It's very kind of difficult to and everything. So you have to kind of handle that with care. So it's good to kind of think long term and look at little problems that you might have maybe with a person. If here in this case, we're only talking in terms of relationships, but look at maybe small problems you might see that might turn into big problems, and be a little bit more measured about how you handle your relationships with that person if you are gonna kind of treat them with contempt or try to use them in a way to gain power. So that's essentially all the reversal touches on. It's just being careful when applying this law, especially when dealing with people.
Yeah, you can show contempt for an idea or a group of people or whatever, publicly, but essentially keep your eye on them regardless, because it could, it could turn into something much bigger.
Definitely.
In the future. So with that.
And yeah, with that, we've reached the end of the program for the 48 Laws of Power podcast. My name is Rudy Malumba.
And I'm John Karp.
Signing off. Well, that was our take. What do you think? Email us at the 48 Laws of Power podcast at gmail.com.
Be sure to check us out on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and like us on Facebook.
Listen in every Monday as we air new episodes.